Good evening. Welcome, and good evening to the Good, the Bad, and the Odd online dating podcast. I'm your host, Craig Palmer, author of The Good, the Bad, and the Odd online dating book. I'm also a certified domestic violence counselor and anger management counselor, among other things. Also, let me introduce my co host, Rosalind Williams, who's also a counselor, author. She formerly hosts the Life Matters Today television program and has extensive experience working with individuals dealing with mental illness, substance abuse. And don't forget to like and subscribe and share with your friends our podcast. Tonight, we're going to be talking about safety and ethics regarding online dating, right? Because what we find is a lot of, safety is always an issue, right? Because, obviously we want, as we're out there trying to find love, we also want to make certain that we're safe, right? So, for instance, I recall reading a woman's profile once, and it said, "I just don't want to end up on Dateline," and so we don't want anyone to end up on Dateline. So safety is always paramount when we're talking about online dating. So tonight, I'm going to be flying alone, possibly. I don't know if my co-host is going to be able to join us, but nevertheless, the show must go on. So safety, right? So there are certain things that I think that people should really think about if they haven't already when they decide to go online and pursue online dating. The first thing is that obviously you have to have some sort of communication with any individual that you potentially might be involved with. So you need to have a phone number. So obviously Google provides a free phone number that you can give out to someone in the event that you want to share numbers and actually have a conversation with them. Because I've always said that an actual conversation is more important than texting because you get a better sense of the person when you're actually communicating with them and have a conversation with them, right? So I would suggest get a Google number. But listen, it's nothing wrong with getting an additional cell phone if you're planning to pursue love, right? Maybe you're concerned with the person having your actual number, which is fine. But I do think that you should. And nowadays you can get a cell phone for like $20. So I would highly suggest if you don't get a Google number, then get, because I don't know if with Google numbers, I don't think you can like forward pictures and things like that with a Google number, a Google voice number. Whereas with a cell phone you get for like $20, obviously you can send, pictures, things like that and really have a conversation with the person. And, if you don't like the conversation, obviously you can block their number. I recall listening to Dateline once, and they were talking about how a woman had actually met this guy online, and she, met with him. She thought that when she met him, she thought she had hit the jackpot because when she met with him, the guy pulled up in a Bentley, right? And he lived in an exclusive high rise in Chicago. And she just thought, she hit the jackpot. Come to find out, the guy was broke. The Bentley was rented from someone, right? And, it was a farce. And so what ended up happening was the guy, she went on Instagram and shouted him out and told everybody that he was fake and all that kind of stuff. And ultimately, he went and unfortunately, killed her and and so on and all that kind of stuff. So, that's why we're talking a little bit about safety tonight because it's so imperative, right? And so then others, I mean, think about safety from a different perspective now. So, obviously you shouldn't invite someone to your home until you're comfortable. You should meet, I believe you should meet folks someplace, obviously well lit, not a back alley or nothing like that, but, maybe at a restaurant, a Starbucks, and sit down and have a conversation with them. I recall one woman had reached out to me a long time ago, and we were texting back and forth, and she wanted to meet without actually having a conversation. Now, me personally, I would never um, meet with someone unless I actually had a conversation with them because I did that one time, and what I found was that me and the person didn't have any chemistry. The conversation seemed a little strained. And so I think you should really obviously have a conversation with the person. And for safety purposes, I would highly encourage folks to video chat. I'm a big proponent of video chatting, right? Because if you video chat with someone, you get a chance to look at them, right? So one of the questions is, at what point do you feel it's safe to give your real phone number? Well, from a guy's standpoint, I have no issue with giving someone my number because I'm not concerned with someone, hitting me over the head and kidnapping me. But I can understand why a woman might be concerned. So I kind of feel like you should almost trust your instincts. Kind of see what how the conversation goes via text first, and then I know a lot of women say, well, I don't have a problem, blocking the person. Well, the problem with blocking someone is that they still have your number. So if you block someone, they can always call from a different number, right? They can always still try to reach you from a different number. So to me, I don't think blocking necessarily is always the answer. That's why I suggest maybe a different phone number entirely if you're serious about love. Because think about it. Some people might spend money on an actual, like Match.com, or they might spend money on eHarmony and stuff like that. It's probably it's more beneficial just to pay for an actual second phone number and have that person kind of call you from there and see how that goes. So instinctively, I think you have to just kind of trust your gut because there's no right or wrong answer to when you give someone your phone number. Like I said, I'm not concerned with giving someone my number because I think that most of the time, if you're not interested in a woman, I think she kind of understands early on if you're not calling her. Like I've called a couple of folks and I didn't get a great vibe sometimes, or maybe the person just was didn't seem highly interested. And if the communication breaks down, the person kind of recognizes that the interest is not on the level it should be, or so they kind of stop calling you. I don't think you have to block them per se. I think women block numbers probably more than men. I think in the amount of time I've been online, I think I've only had to block two women. I remember one woman I had to block because, and this is a funny story. On my profile, I said that I don't like nose rings, right? Now, no, aren't necessarily a deal breaker for me, but I'm just not a fan of nose rings, especially the ones that kind of come in the nostril, right in the front. So anyway, there was this woman online, and I said, you know, nice picture. Um, and so she read my profile, and she says, "What's the matter with nose rings?" And I said, "I'm just not a fan of them." But there's guys out there that don't care. There's plenty of guys out there that don't mind nose rings, right? And so she says, that's the problem with you black. She sends me this in a text. This is the problem with you black men. You often judge a book by its cover and don't give women a fair shot. And that's why I date white men, and white men aren't like that, and this and that. And she went on. I mean, the text was enormous, right? So I said to her, good luck on your search. And I blocked her. Right? Now, she actually went to, back then, I used to have a Facebook page. And she went to the Facebook page that I had for a group that I was a member of, and got my phone number and sent me another text on my cell phone, basically saying much of what she had said the first time. But this time, she went into her background, and, how she was wealthy, and how, she was traveling in the world and all sorts of kind of stuff. And, I just kind of thought that was a lot to go through, just to tell someone you didn't appreciate the fact that I don't like nose rings. I was watching a show a couple of weeks ago on Pop the Balloon, and this guy says to a woman he didn't like her hair. I think she might have had like her hair braided in, or a wig or extensions, whatever she had. But anyway, he said he didn't appreciate her hair. And when I tell you, the women on the show ate him up. They didn't appreciate the fact that he said he didn't like her hair. And I guess a lot of, sisters have weaves, and, they wear wigs, and, different things. And, that was his preference. I didn't think they should have ate him up like they did. But, that just like the nose ring, it's a preference. It's not, I wouldn't, like I said, I wouldn't call it necessarily a deal breaker. But when you're dealing with online dating, that's the beauty about online dating, is that you can select people that kind of check off the boxes. And for me, someone with a nose ring doesn't check off the box, right? So these are things that we have to be mindful of. So when it comes to safety, right? The other thing is, uh, you have to be even more careful when it comes to safety when you have children, right? I think that you shouldn't introduce anyone to your children, especially if they're under a certain age, right? So, like for instance, if I had children that was 6 years old, anywhere from like 2 years old to like 6 or 7 years old, I wouldn't really want to introduce them to someone until I was absolutely certain this is someone that had staying power, right? And I get it. Sometimes you want to introduce someone because you want to see how they vibe with your child. But, there are a lot of pedophiles out there. So I would suggest for women, do your due diligence, and men too, but more so women. Do your due diligence when it comes to checking guys' backgrounds, especially if you have young children. Because, like I said, there are a lot of pedophiles out there, and you hear a lot of horror stories. And so you don't want those type of things to happen, right? And, pedophiles, you can go on, certain websites, and they'll tell you how many pedophiles are in your neighborhood. If you go to the local police website in your local district, in your county, they probably have a list of known pedophiles and things like that. So I would tell any woman, do your due diligence when it comes to that. Don't introduce guys to a watchdog. Okay, great, thank you. So there's I guess watchdog websites that look out for things like that. So definitely, do your due diligence when it comes to that. The other thing when it comes to safety is, and I tell my daughter this, when you go out, be careful, because even though you don't know the guy and you might have feel comfortable with him, you still really don't know his intentions. So you may want to make certain that you are watching your drink. And this is not to scare women, but I'm just trying to be, you know, just to remind women that you have to be careful. I mean, there are guys out there that will drug your drink, right? And so, you turn your head and, he slips something in your drink, and next thing you're unconscious somewhere or something like that. So I used to tell my daughter, like, don't leave your drink unattended. Don't, turn your head and stuff like that, because this is real talk. This really happens in real life. And so you don't want to, be part of something like that. So, just be careful. And that's why sometimes, it's kind of, I personally, and I get it, I personally think that when you do a meet and greet, you really should kind of pay for your own drink, probably pay for your own meal initially, because there are guys out there that will get very angry if you don't want to hang out with them after they pay for your meal. So when you meet someone for the first time, just for safety purposes, yo, meet them at the restaurant if that's what you're gonna do, and pay for your own meal. That way he doesn't feel entitled to anything because he didn't pay for anything, he didn't help you get there, nothing like that. And and another thing that a lot of women do for safety purposes, which is also a good thing, is let people know where you are. If you're gonna go on a date, tell someone, right? Tell the person, I'm going on a date with this person, we're meeting here, right? Nowadays with, Google, share your location with a friend or family member. Like I share my location if I was going on a date. And listen, like I said, I'm not concerned with someone hitting me over the head. But things do happen. So I share my location with my daughter so that she knows if I'm on a date, God forbid, because I've heard horror stories. I heard a horror story in Florida where a guy went on a date, and when he showed up, the woman robbed him. There was a guy there. The woman, met the guy, and then there was another guy there, and he got robbed at gunpoint, right? So these things are real, real stories. These things really happen. So, guys have to be careful as well. Don't meet someone at a hotel. That sounds like a bad idea from the jump. If a woman's looking to meet you at a hotel, I would suggest don't do that, because it sounds fishy right off the jump. Because what woman would want to meet you at a hotel? That makes no sense, right? So, and what guy would want to meet a woman at a hotel? You know what I mean? That just spells unsafe. So, definitely, meet places that are well lit, populated, and listen, even from a standpoint, when you're leaving, make certain the person isn't following you home. There was an instance where this woman met a guy online. This is a true story. And she picked him up in her car, and she decided to take him to her house, which was like maybe 10 minutes away. And but she wasn't interested in the guy, and she dropped him off. And afterwards, she told her mother, Mom, I didn't like him, this and that. And a month later, the guy showed up and ends up killing her. And I think her son had witnessed it. This happened like, outside the country. But I'm just saying, like, these are real. These are real stories, and these things really, really happen. So, just definitely be aware of your surroundings. Don't leave your drink unattended, and really kind of get to know the person. I would kind of say that you probably need to interact with the person for at least a month, right? And I'm not saying you should wait a month before you meet someone. I kind of personally believe it's better to meet someone early on than later on. And the reason why is because sometimes there's a tendency to get involved emotionally with folks over the online. And so before you get emotionally involved and wrapped up and stuff like that, meet the person, online, somewhere to get a sense of, is there some chemistry? Do you like the person before, you start engaging in a lot of conversation? Because what happens is, you could tell a person your whole life story. You could tell them, about your kids and all this other kind of stuff. And then you meet the person in person and you're not feeling the person, right? From that perspective, because that does happen. You could vibe with someone over the phone and then realize, you know what? I'm not that attracted to the person physically, right? Which is fine. If you're not attracted to someone physically, that's fine. But before you go get super involved with the person and start liking them, and then you meet them in person, because it happened to me once. One time I was talking to this young lady over the phone. She was pretty, and we finally decided to meet. And this is after talking for a couple of weeks, and we were talking pretty regularly, and we met, and it wasn't the same. I just didn't get the same vibe from her. And so it didn't, nothing materialized from it. And stuff like that happens, which is fine. So go into online dating understanding that you might meet folks that end up being just good friends, right? Like I met a young lady online many years ago, and we're still really cool to this day. And she met her husband online. And one of my cousin's friends met his girlfriend online. So there's not a stigma with meeting people online, but once again, you should do it safely. Like, I wouldn't suggest going out of the country to meet anyone. Like, there's this show on television, I think it's called 90 Day Fiance, if I'm not mistaken, right? And on the show, these folks are going to like Indonesia, and they're going to like Tibet and all kind of crazy places to meet folks. That I ain't doing. I think you should meet someone in the U.S. and in the safe confines of the U.S. Not in the Philippines. You're not flying to France, right, and stuff like that. And I get it. If you're not, seeing the type of success that you want, you might, like, for instance, there's one woman online. She met this guy in Africa, right, and flew to Africa to meet him and all sorts of kind of stuff. I'm sorry, there, especially from a guy standpoint, there's enough women in the U.S. that you don't need to be flying to Africa or the Philippines for someone. And there's enough guys in the U.S. where a woman doesn't have to fly to, Africa or, Cuba, or, Curacao and all that kind of stuff to meet a guy. So just from a safety standpoint, and also listen, they tell you this: don't give money, don't send money to anyone. There are a lot of scams out there, right? And assure, one of the biggest scams out there, and you should know this. when you see a profile and the person says they're in the military, and I'm not saying that, military folks aren't looking for love, but one of the biggest scams out there is they'll have, they'll put a picture of a guy in a military uniform, and the guy will say he's out of the country, and he'll text you and stuff like that, and before you know it, they're sending money to guys overseas. I'm like, what? Like, this one woman sent this guy like $15,000, right? And this is what he said. He said that his military pay was held up and that he needed some assistance. And, can you send my daughter some money and I'll get it back to you when I come to the US and all this kind of stuff. And this woman sent this guy $15,000. Um, that sounds so crazy. And I get it. There's some folks out there that have a big heart, but you also got to be smart. You don't send people money, right? I remember one time I was supposed to go on a date once, and the woman texts me right before the date, and she says, "I don't have gas money." And I'm thinking, well, then you shouldn't be dating, right? Because I know she was thinking I was going to say, "Hey, let me cash app you some gas money." No, that's not happening, right? Because when you're from New York, like I am, we're very skeptical and very cautious, right? But that I'm sure, trust me when I tell you, and I'm sure of this with 100% certainty, that there's plenty of guys out there sending women money, when she says, I need gas money. Fellas, if the woman says she doesn't have gas money, leave her alone. And women, if the guy doesn't have gas money, yeah, that's a problem also. All right. And I get it. Sometimes financially, sometimes there are things going on. Sometimes you might have to pause dating to get your finances in order, right? So from a safety standpoint, right, don't send money. Don't send money Western Union. Don't send money Cash App, things like that. Just be very, very careful with that. Now, when it comes to ethics, there's funny thing about ethics, right? Because ethically, you would think that people are going to be honest with you when it comes to online, right? Do you feel like they're going to be honest with you in terms of what they do, how many children they have, how tall they are, things like that? But that's not reality. The reality is that men and women lie. And so, my personal opinion is men and women lie about different things, right? So, men, we lie about our height. Now, I've never lied about my height, but then again, I'm fortunate enough, I'm tall, right? But there are guys out there who are like 5'10", they're going to say they're 6 feet. If they're 5'9", they might say they're 6 feet, right? Because online, I could just tell you there are a lot of profiles where women say that they want a guy that's tall, right? Because there are a lot of tall women online, right? Like I'm shocked, like when I see women that are like 5'10", 6 feet, right? Like there are a lot of tall women online, and I get it because I honestly believe the taller the woman is, the more difficult she's gonna find it to find someone suitable for her. Because remember, the average height for a brother is probably about 5'11". That's the average height. So if you're looking for a guy that's well over 6 feet, you might find that a little challenging to find. So understand when you go online that, listen, I remember a young lady that I'm really cool with that I met online. She met a guy online, right? And he said that he was a manager for Walmart. Now, Walmart pays pretty well, their managers. So she's thinking the guy, he's making a good salary. Come to find out, he wasn't a manager, he was a team lead. And team leads make considerably less than a store manager. So, he kind of stretched the truth about what he did. And so you're going to find guys, like I'm sure there are guys out there who are saying they're lawyers when they're actually paralegals, right? So I'm just saying, like, you have to kind of pay attention to what's being said because people are going to stretch the truth, right? So, like, women lie about, and I'm just basing this upon what I've heard and seen. Some women lie about how many baby daddies they have. Like sometimes women that have 5 kids, right, by 4 different guys. And, there are going to be guys that look at that and don't find that to be attractive. So, a woman, she can lie and say, I got 5 kids, 4 or 5 kids by one guy, or maybe 2 guys, when in fact it might be 3 or 4 guys, right? Um, and like I said, guys, we lie about different things. Like we'll lie, there are guys out there that'll lie about how many kids they have, you know. Um, they may have 6 kids, but 6 kids might scare off a lot of women. Because think about it, a guy with 6 kids, right? How responsible are you being? 6 kids by, let's just say, maybe 4 different women, right? And that's not to say that the guy isn't taking care of his kids, you know, um, financially, but it just speaks to being irresponsible, um, because kids need both parents. And so, as a father, you have 4 or 5 kids, but 4 different women or something like that. You can't be in 4 different places at one time. And I know there's extenuating circumstances, but a lot of different things. So, but nevertheless, a woman that hears a guy has like 5 or 6 kids, she's going to question like his decision making. She's going to question certain things, and vice versa. A guy, who meets a woman and she has 5 kids by 4 different guys, he's going to question her decision making. I'm sorry, that's just reality. And no one, and that's not to say that people don't make mistakes early on, and that there aren't extenuating circumstances. Because I remember one time listening online, a woman, she had 4 kids, and the guy was like, 4 kids, and she had four kids by 2 different guys. I think the first guy had passed away, and then the second 2 kids were twins and stuff like that. And so things happen. Everybody should be able to find love, but understand that certain circumstances may make it more difficult. I think some women realize that. I think that's why, if you have kids early on, I find that, and this is just in conversations that I've had, I see a lot of women who kind of decide to kind of wait before they start dating. Like they go long stretches without dating because, listen, their focus is their kids. And listen, kids pose challenges. Even with myself, my sons, with sports and different activities and things like that, make it challenging for me to go out on dates and things like that because I have a responsibility. And so do women. Women have responsibilities. And so like there's this one young lady I met, and I must admit she's great. She is a great woman. um very attractive, smart, hardworking, the type of woman that would make any guy very, very happy. Unfortunately, she has a special needs daughter, and I'm sure that poses a challenge for her because she doesn't have the support system. I think her family is probably not that supportive with her daughter. And so she's going to find it challenging potentially to meet someone, even though she is a really, really great woman. Just in talking to her, and I met her a couple of times, really, really nice woman. But we have to be realistic. We know that if you have a special needs child, that's going to pose a challenge, right? I remember one young lady that I was talking to, another very smart, attractive woman, very accomplished. Unfortunately, she has a special needs son, right? And so I had asked her once. I said, "Well, how does that impact on your future mate? Because her son is never going to be able to live on his own. He's one of those kids that does, I don't know if they call it high on the spectrum or low on the spectrum. I'm not really certain how that works. But he's one of these kids that he could never live on his own. So he would either need to be in a home, in a facility, or he would need his parent or someone to oversee him his entire life. And so she said, he's going to be with me for his entire life. So anybody she gets involved with is going to have to accept the fact that, listen, it's a package deal. If you want her, he has to come along for the ride. And so there are going to be guys out there that are not going to be willing to take that ride, right? And so in those situations, women are going to find it more challenging to find someone. So understand when you go online, you're going to meet folks that might have stretched the truth a little bit. And, I see a lot of women say online they want complete and total honesty. Well, you're sometimes not going to get complete and total honesty because the guy understands if you're completely honest with them, you're not going to give them a shot. Like I said, if a guy, I'll be honest with you, I have a friend of mine who has 7 kids by 7 different women, right? Now, if he tells a woman, I got 7 kids by 7 different women, um, I could just tell you, he's going to miss out on a lot of women because there are going to be a lot of women that's going to be like, no, 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 right? And so when he meets women, that's kind of going to be the last thing he probably discusses because I think he's going to want the woman to kind of get to know him before he kind of mentions that he has 7 kids by 7 women. Like, I'm sure he's not lying and saying he doesn't have 7 kids. He's just probably not mentioning how many women are involved with the 7 kids, right? Like, there was this one woman I met online, and she has 8 kids, right? 8 kids. And all of the kids are, the oldest is 14. Now, she was married for, I think, 10 years, and she's got 8 kids by one guy, her ex-husband, right? And I think the youngest kid is maybe 3 or 4, something like that. And I could just tell you, and if you saw her, you would never know she had 8 kids. I'm telling you. Like, you would think that someone with 8 kids, you expect them to be out of shape and all this other kind of stuff. Uh, but that's not the case. She was in great shape and she had 8 kids, right? And so I said to her, she says, "Is that a problem?" Uh, and I said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm sorry, 8 kids is too many for me." I had to be honest with her. I was like, "No, that's a deal breaker." Right? And she's like, and then what's so funny is after I said that to her, I saw her profile again online, and the profile said, "I have 8 kids, deal with it." Right? So I guess I must have made an impact, right? So Calvin says, um, the person has to be completely honest. And, if you're going to be hot and heavy, allow the person to make the choice to decide whether they want to deal with the person or not. Yes. Yes, I completely agree. If you have something that you know is a major issue, you're gonna have to be honest. I'm sorry, because it's gonna come out eventually. Like for instance, there was this guy. He met this woman online. This woman told me the story. She met this guy online, and she spoke to him for about a month. Right? They video chatted, and they just was smitten with each other, and they was thinking, this is the one. This is the person I want to settle down with, bar none. Right? And so finally, after a month, they're talking about moving in with each other. The guy's talking about, I could see myself marrying you, all kind of stuff. Right? And then they finally meet. And the guy shows up. They met at a bar. The guy shows up with a prosthetic leg. And he doesn't tell her he had a prosthetic leg. And so when she sees him, she's like, "You didn't say you had a prosthetic leg." And he's like, "Does it matter?" And she's like, "Yeah." Right? And so, yeah, these things are pertinent. And this is why I say to folks, and this is why I wrote in my book, ask a lot of questions. And that's why I ask a lot of questions. How many kids do you have? What was the relationship? Because you can learn a lot from past relationships. There are some people say, like, there's some women that get offended when you ask them about past relationships. The reason why past relationships are important is because it tells us how you deal with situations, right? And so I want to know, how was your last relationship? Was it good? Was it bad? What did you learn from it? How can you make this next relationship better? Right? Because, every relationship, you should learn something from it. And so if you didn't learn anything from your past relationship, something is wrong. Because I think most people kind of know what they want, right? At least they say they know what they want. But when you meet folks, a lot of people are not going to bring to the table everything you want, right? They're going to bring, I'm going to just say, if there are 10 things you desire, you might get six of them. You might get five of them, five or six of the things. If you want 10 things and you get all 10, I'm just going to keep it real with you. Hold on with dear life. Hold on to that person because it's hard to get everything that you want from someone, right? So you might get someone that maybe doesn't have all of the physical characteristics that you want, but maybe they are just have a great heart. Maybe they are very kind. Maybe they're really good listeners. Because believe me, there are folks out there that are not good listeners, right? There are folks out there that are very opinionated. There's folks out there that don't have a good heart. And these are the folks that are going to leave you in an instant when an emergency arises, and they're not going to be by your side. So, you have to get those things as well. Don't trust a big butt and a smile, right? Don't get with someone just because they're, handsome or pretty. Don't let that be the only barometer. See how they treat others. See how they conduct themselves, things like that. Just don't go with them because, oh, she's so gorgeous. No, because sometimes the most attractive women can be the most difficult, right? And so, look below the surface. Don't just look at the surface. Look below the surface. Look at, like I said, how the person treats others. Are they kind? Are they giving? Are they supportive? Do they share your vision? Right? Maybe you want to start your own business, right? And ask the person, what do you think about, how would you support me or support your partner if they wanted to start their own business? Like, for instance, I remember a young lady that I met online. She had a grocery store, and her husband wasn't supportive with the grocery store, right? And so she had to like work the grocery store by herself. And I was shocked. I was like, your husband never came and worked at the grocery store with you? She was like, no. And I'm like, I don't see how you can have a partner that's not supportive, that is not going to roll up their sleeves, whatever that endeavor is, and not be supportive. If, I'm traveling to sell books, I want my partner to be there with me. I want my partner to be supportive. I want her to be like, yo, let's sell these books, right? If she's doing something, I'm gonna be like, yo, I'm coming with you. I'm gonna help support you in what you do, what your vision is. And that's what's supposed to happen in relationships. But sometimes that doesn't happen. So when it comes to ethics, understand that people are not going to always be completely honest, right? And that's fine, right? Because they might tell a little white lie. Certain things, you just have to be honest about. Don't lie about certain things. But they're going to be little white lies along the way. How long someone's been involved with someone. They might, let's say they was involved with someone a year. They might say they was involved with the person, 8 months. Sometimes like that. Things, little white lies, but big lies, no. Those things you got to be come clean about. And then, obviously, if you get involved with the person, and this person is potentially going to be someone that you see yourself with long term, then you're going to have to dig a little deeper. And what I mean by that is you should talk to the person about their financial situation, right? Um, you know, what they do. Do they have savings? What's their credit rating? Like things like that. Those things are important when you decide to settle down with someone. Now, if you're just dating someone, that's a little different because you don't need to. A person doesn't need to know your credit rating and if you have savings and things like that early on. But if you decide to be with the person long term, then those are things that you should discuss. I'm sorry, those are things that you're going to have to discuss, right? Do you have any outstanding debt? Because if you decide to marry someone, in a lot of cases, that person's debt becomes yours. And I've heard situations where, you know, guys, or your guys have married a woman and, you took on some of her debt. So, guys have to be very careful, and women, be very careful. Um, you know, so I would suggest, like I said, and you'll hear me say this often: do your due diligence, right? But also go into any potential relationship healed because sometimes there are women out there and guys who have roadblocks, they have barriers up because they've been hurt. Listen, when it all comes to the game of love, uh, there's always that potential that you could get hurt. I'm sorry, that's just reality. And so you're going to have to accept that. You might get with someone. I remember someone telling me recently they was dating this guy and for about 6 months, and she thought everything was great. And out of nowhere, the guy says, this is not working out, and he breaks up with her. And she said she was devastated. She was devastated because there was no warning. She thought everything was fine. So you should ask the person, how are things, how do you think things are progressing? Not necessarily say, do you see yourself with me and things like that, but asking them, are there any things that you feel are red flags for you? Because sometimes there are things that you might think are red flags, and sometimes they're really not. You're assuming these things. So you want to ask them, because people change jobs. Like you might meet a guy who's living with his mama, and a woman might assume he's living with his mama because he can't afford to live on his own, when in fact he's living with his mama because she's in poor health, right? So you've got to find out, like, ask questions, don't assume anything. I appreciate a woman that asks questions because that says that they're one trying to get to know you, but also they're not assuming anything because it's very easy to assume certain things, you know. So let's see. Calvin says, especially when the man has, and I'm going to just share this, especially when the man has child support or taxes and not paying at the end of the year, then tax time to file a joint return, the government will take what is due. Hey, that is so true, right? So let's keep it real. That's why, find and this, we're talking obviously about marriage, but these things are, this is real talk. I had a friend that married someone, and he didn't know that the woman had a lot of financial issues. And so he got kind of caught up with these financial issues. And I'm thinking to myself, like, how do you not ask these questions? How do you not find out about, their finances and things like that prior to marrying someone? This is because people get very distracted, they get emotionally involved, and they take their eyes off of the big picture. When you're married to someone, that is a partnership. And so, you know we have what we have. You have to kind of know, like, what the person's situation is. And listen, if you really want to stay with the person, you might want to help them get out of that situation before you marry the person, because maybe they're just bad with money. Maybe they don't know. Credit is something that can be worked on. It's something that can be fixed relatively quickly. You can call creditors. There are things that can be taken off your credit report with letters. So there are ways of dealing with stuff like that, but nevertheless, you have to ask those questions, right? So anyway, just to kind of wrap up a little bit what we talked about tonight, with safety, right? We talked a lot about safety. Very, very important for men and women who are out there. Trust your instincts. If something tells you something is wrong, trust it. I'm a very big believer in trusting my instincts. If my instincts tell me something is wrong, I believe it. I believe my instincts. I don't shy away from them. Because if the woman acts a certain way, so the question is, when's the right time to ask these questions? Um, Too early. Okay, that's a great question. Um, if the person is serious, if they're serious about finding a partner, they'll appreciate these questions. If the person isn't serious, this is just my opinion, then they might be offended by it. And think about it. If the person, and I'm not saying ask them the first day their finances and things like that, because I've had women say, I've asked a woman, what do you do for a living? And she's like, why? Why? Because and I'm not asking for your social security number. I'm not asking for the address to your job. I'm just asking, what do you do for a living? Because that does play a role. Does the person have a stable work history? Are they, because listen, I'm gonna keep it real with you. There are women that go out there and meet guys and don't know that the guy's a drug dealer. How do you not know, right? Um, because they didn't ask questions, right? So, what he does for a living, you have to ask these questions like, what do you do for a living? How long have you worked there? You don't. You might not necessarily need to know the location of where the person works at, but these things you should ask them. That's fine to ask right away. Now, after you decide this is someone that you want to pursue something genuine with, something that you could potentially be lifelong, then that's when you ask questions like that, like how's your credit, right? And this is real talk. So that way you can think about building something, right? And that's when you're planning to build something, that's when you want to find out how many bricks do we have, right? And that's when you start asking these questions because then they should be honest with you because once um, you know they tell you, what, my finances is a little tight, and I'm not saying discard someone because their finances is tight. It just might mean they might need a little bit more time, right? Because like I said, things do happen, right? Especially if you have kids. If you have kids, person you're seeing, has kids, 2 or 3 kids. You have 2 or 3 kids. Kids are expensive. They have, that's your first responsibility, right? But you still need companionship. You still want a partner. So you can still work those things out. And I think sometimes people are not mindful of that. I know that, someone that I'm going to be involved with, she needs to know, like, yo, I have 2 responsibilities. So, and I like to treat, a partner, but I can't necessarily, pay for them to get their hair done and stuff like that all the time because I got responsibility. I got 2 kids to take care of, and that person has to be mindful of that. And so I try to be transparent about that. And I think everyone should be transparent about that when it comes to security and ethics and stuff like that. Let the person know, how many kids you have, what your responsibilities are, and stuff like that, and see how they cope with that. Because if they're not able to cope with that, then they're probably not a good fit. Because there was someone that I was dating, and she had an issue with my time, the time that I had to spend with my son with his traveling basketball. And so I had to accept the fact that she wasn't a good fit. I was transparent with her and letting her know that, my time sometimes can be a little hectic with him with his AAU basketball. And so be upfront with your partner, any potential partner. Let them know about any time restraints, things like that, and let them make the determination if it's something that they want to continue to pursue, right? Because there was one young lady I remember talking to, a really nice lady, very attractive, very accomplished, but she didn't have a lot of time, right? Because she had a job, she had her own business, she had 2 kids. So, sometimes there's just not enough hours in a day, right? So, anyway, I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight on the Good, the Bad, and the Odd of Online Dating podcast. My name is Craig Palmer, right? We're here every Tuesday at 9. If I'm not here, my host will probably be here, or I'll let you know when we have to record a show because I do go on vacation. So, and I will be going on vacation soon for a couple of weeks. So those shows will be recorded in advance, so you won't have that live capability to call into the show. But nevertheless, I want to thank everyone who's listening on all the different podcast platforms, everyone that's listening on YouTube. Please remember to like and subscribe and to share with your family and friends. And I want to say thank you. Have a pleasant evening. and stay safe. And we'll see you next week at 9 p.m. on the Good, the Bad, and the Odd of Online Dating podcast. Have a good night.